Hello, hello. Welcome to the Sky and Free podcast. This is our first episode. I'm Sky, and
I'm free.
today we're going to talk about how we learn Japanese. So we both live in Japan, in Tokyo, and we've been studying Japanese for about 5 years. And we both speak Japanese, you could say fluently. We read as well. We don't really write. Um, but that's okay because when you use Japanese in day-to-day life, you mostly um, you input it through a keyboard or through your mobile device. So yeah, you don't really have to write. You just have to be able to know the sounds. So yeah. So for you, what was
Nice.
your? How did you start, or why did you start learning Japanese,
Why did I
or
start
why did we
learning
start? I
Japanese?
guess we started together.
I think it was in university. It was just, what course we were going to take. And I mean, it would just seem like the most interesting one at that time. Um, I mean, to be honest, it was probably just to make our mom happy. I mean, she's Japanese. And, I figured that, she'd like it if we took
Yeah.
the course.
Yeah, so that was one thing we didn't mention. We're half Japanese, so we actually spoke Japanese till we were 5 years old. But then we promptly forgot when we moved to Canada. So yeah, we lived in Japan, then we moved to Canada, and we forgot very quickly. Actually, we would talk to our grandparents who live in Japan over the phone. There was no Skype then, and over the course of like I think a couple months, we first were able to we could understand Japanese still, but we lost the ability to speak, um, and we would reply in English to them, and our mom would translate. And after that, we completely forgot how. Yeah, so yeah, I
Yeah.
guess we since 18 we study Japanese, and I think probably Free's reasons for learning Japanese are maybe slightly different than me. I just did it because I mostly enjoy doing it. It's very interesting to learn a language. I mean, it takes a long time. A lot of people say it's hard. I wouldn't necessarily say it's hard, but you certainly have to enjoy it over the long term because it takes a long time. Yeah, but if you practice every day, you learn it. So maybe that leads to like the next thing. Well, what do you think was difficult about learning Japanese?
What was difficult?
I mean, I can say what I found difficult as well. Um, I would say the first thing that's difficult is probably what a lot of people suspect, and that is kind of like the structure, like the basic grammar, learning the words, stuff like that is kind of like a known difficulty with learning a language. And I think for the first year or two, that probably like constitutes a large part of what makes it difficult. But after you gain the ability to speak a bit and make friends, um, I'd say the next difficult thing is to make friends in that foreign language and like from that different culture. And that kind of comes for me to the point that actually makes it difficult, which is learning a different culture or learning a different mindset. And that is critical to say, likable in a foreign language or um, make yourself seem like one of them. Would be
Yeah.
a way to put it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And I think almost what's difficult is that, like, as we were learning it, there's always, like, a new thing that it's not known, like, what's causing the issue. Like, maybe I'm speaking and then, I say a joke and it's not very funny. But then it's like, I have
Mm.
to figure out why it wasn't funny. And nobody's going to tell me, oh, this is the reason why your joke wasn't funny. But then there's always, there's, it's like every say in Japanese, it's not funny to make like a really direct kind of like vulgar joke or something. There may be more into like maybe like kind of British humor where it's like more ironic or more like
Self-deprecating.
self-deprecating, that sort of thing. Yeah. So figuring it out, it's a bit like programming actually, where it's figuring out what's causing the bug, what's causing the issue, and then just okay, then now we can pretty easily find a solution to that, practice the solution, and then okay, that's problem solved. But oh, there's another one. Maybe there's a different situation where something I'm saying like isn't working or something, and then again okay, figuring out what's causing the issue, what's the bug,
Mm.
and then solving that.
I've heard that's like debugging, I guess is what you're describing, and that I've heard in other contexts as well. For example, our sister is a doctor, and when a doctor diagnoses a patient, they get a list of symptoms and they talk with the patient. And from kind of a very small amount of data, from a set of symptoms, they have to diagnose what the root cause of the problem is. And maybe that's a very general skill that can be applied in a lot of areas. In programming, in medicine, in learning a language. I'm sure in other places like management of teams, if there's an issue, finding what's actually causing an issue, it's a very general skill that's very useful.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, the other the other thing that we wanted to talk about was so how like we learned Japanese, but then how does that apply to our job specifically? So we're programmers, but um, we found that learning Japanese, like strangely enough, has like pretty direct impact on
Well, I would
us
probably
working.
go further to say that just learning a foreign language, and maybe particularly a language from a culture that is quite different from your own, probably the farther the culture, the well, I wouldn't say you gain more, but there is probably more to learn because more things are different and it requires a greater change in mindset. Um,
But we've never learned any similar languages.
I study some German.
Oh,
But anyways, yeah. So I think the ability to well, for me personally, what I find useful is the ability to understand what another person's mindset is. Because even within programming, there's a lot of different fields and areas, and kind of, you could say, schools of thought for the best way to structure code, to write code, different styles. There's very kind of trivial things, like, say, if you're a programmer, you know this is when people write code, if you use tabs or spaces, that's like it's just super superficial. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. But there are more probably fundamental things in different ways of programming, like say functional programming, versus just standard. What would you call that? Not
imperative.
imperative programming. Um, and they're very different styles, I guess. And when you have a single team of people and you have different ways of thinking in a team, it's very important to be able to understand each other's mindset and where they're coming from. And if you completely understand each other, or as much as you can to a large degree, it reduces a lot of, I guess, friction between the people. Because if you understand somebody, you can't, you can always see where they're coming from. When people, um, when there's conflict, it's often because they don't understand what the other person is thinking and where they're coming from. It seems like they're random or they're crazy, but that usually often is not the case. Sometimes
Mm.
it is, but
Yeah.
often it isn't.
The
So yeah,
Yeah, the other thing I found also is, I mean, essentially learning a language. It's mostly, I mean, there's the studying part, but for the most part, it's interacting with people, and like in our job, programmers, crazy enough, aren't always just like by themselves in front of their computer. A lot
yeah,
of the time, or a lot of what's really important is interacting with other team and just that whole process talking to our manager, figuring out what we want to do, coordinating with everybody.
I would say that interacting with people when doing programming is as important as being good at programming.
Hmm.
So it's a critical skill, being able to work well with the team. And me and Free, we work remotely, so I think that becomes even more important. And yeah, I mean, you always have to keep up at it. And if you kind of forget that that is important, it can basically destroy a project, or it just won't work.
uh,
So you always have to be vigilant, and we have to be vigilant to make sure that we remember that it's not just about writing the code; it's about interacting with people.
mm.
And
there's
yeah,
there's a related element to this too. We found for learning a language, we were coordinators at a language exchange, and one of the key things was to create a good atmosphere there,
mhm.
because it's very difficult. Say there's somebody who's just starting, and they're still not super confident
I think
about.
you have to explain that a little bit more though. So me
Oh
and
yeah.
Free, we often say this where it's important to create a good atmosphere, but essentially what that means is when you have a group of people and group dynamics, if there's a positive atmosphere where everybody feels good, everybody feels comfortable with each other, many things become much easier. For example, just communication happens freely because people are happy to talk to each other, and
Mm.
it's casual and it's calm and people are relaxed. Um, Often when things are going badly, people will say, for example, there's a lack of communication on the team, but that sometimes stems from
I,
um, oh yeah,
one
go
point, specifically, the opposite of good atmosphere is usually toxicity, where
yes, yes.
it's
Yes.
it
So
feels toxic.
so a toxic team would be the opposite, and that's highly ineffective.
Mhm.
So often when there's problems like say a lack of communication, that can stem from the fact that say if team members don't really like each other, they're just not gonna end up not really talking to each other that much. So
They also don't trust each other if they
they
don't.
don't trust
If
each other.
if there's not a good atmosphere, it won't. It's like, oh, that guy, he's out to get me.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
it's like it's a downward spiral instead of the opposite direction, the positive reinforcement loop.
Positive feedback loop.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we often use the term create a good atmosphere. Maybe it needs a little bit of explaining, like we did to explain the context behind it. But it's essentially that if everybody likes each other, if they're getting along, they're having a good time, they're happy to be at work, their goals of what they want to do with their life orient with what the company and the team is doing. Um, this all contributes to everybody liking each other, everybody being happy to be there. Um, and when there's an so this is I'm gonna explain this here. There's in any project issues that come up and problems, and then these cause stresses on the teams and the people and their relationships. But if you have a good atmosphere, it's possible for the team to recover from these problems. But when there's a bad atmosphere or the team is set up in a bad way, um, when there's a big problem or a crisis, the team will fall apart. And you often hear that in like
there's a chance that it'll shatter.
shatter, but basically no system is actually tested until it's put under stress. So pretty much any system will actually work when there are no stresses upon it. You can say, oh, everybody, we'll put all our money in a big pile and we have lots of money and it'll be happy and it'll be great. Which, if there's a huge amount of money everywhere and it's flowing out of the ground, everyone's like, okay, yeah, that's fine. But if there's not, if there becomes a shortage of money, if somebody has to get fired, if there's a problem, oh, the product is delayed for shipping, oh, what are we going to do? When you get into a crisis situation, these structural problems or problems of relationship between people on the team will become apparent. And they'll only become apparent then. So, when the tide goes out, you see who's not wearing shorts, is I think the expression in English. Yeah. So
Yeah, I
basically that.
think that's accurate.
Okay. How long have we been going here? 13.
Well,
do you want to?
Let's just check it out.
Okay. So this has been our first podcast. It's a bit of a short one. But we're just testing out our video recording equipment and stuff like that as well. So thank you for listening and hope to hear from you again.
Thanks, guys.